CNN has spoken to 3 Israeli whistleblowers who have described shocking treatment of Palestinians held prisoners in a military base turned detention center. The base is located in the Negev desert inside Israel's borders, but close to Gaza. This is the account of one Is.raeli who worked there. His identity has been hidden.
We were told they are not allowed to move and must sit upright. They're not allowed to talk or peek under their blindfolds.
And what happened if they did do that? What kind of punishments were meted out?
We were allowed to pick out problematic people and punish them, having them stand with their hands above their heads for an unlimited time. If they didn't keep their hands up, we could zip tie them to the fence.
The Israeli military says detainees are handcuffed based on their risk level and health status. But the account tallies with photographic evidence obtained by CNN of Palestinian detainees inside Sidi Taman, and with hand and wrist injuries shown to CNN by dozens of Palestinians released back into Gaza. I was zip-tied and blindfolded, says this former detainee, and tortured in a way I never imagined. One source telling us the restraints were so tight they had to amputate a man's hand.
The view that I've heard expressed is that, how do you think Israeli hostages are treated by Hamas?
This sentiment was voiced in the facility. But I think that if Hamas is so abominable, which I agree with, then why use Hamas as a bar? It's a descent into dehumanization.
It's clearly a descent into dehumanization. It's very brave for these sort of whistleblowers to come out and speak to the media. I mean, you do also have to worry, or wonder what's happening that we're not being told about, right? Let's look at some testimony from a second worker at the detention center.
You can take them out and hit them maybe 4 or 5 times with a club. It's not done in the face, so you don't see blood. The detainees lie belly down, being hit and kicked, people screaming and dogs barking at them. It's terrifying. Some detainees are taken away and beaten really hard, so bones and teeth are broken.
So you saw people who were subject to these beatings, who had their bones broken and who had their teeth broken?
Yes, it's a practice which commanders know about. They want intelligence, but they also want revenge and punishment for what happened on October 7th.
The Israeli military hasn't approved CNN's requests for access to Sidi Taman. But at the gates of the facility, we challenged the Israeli guards.
How many Palestinians are in there right now? We don't know. Do you know if they're being handcuffed? Are they being blindfolded? No.
This is a facility.
As we leave, masked soldiers approach.
Hello, how are you?
Stop.
I'm filming this way.
It's anything.
We'll leave now. Of the army.
Oh,
So
who are you guys? I'm from CNN.
They try to take our cameras.
Give me please now. Give me please now.
Hang on, what is it that you want? My camera or my card?
Then order us to leave.
I mean, they really don't want people to know what's going on there, right? Trying to take the camera. And just this idea, you're hitting people with clubs, so you're breaking their bones and your teeth, right? And so he's saying that they partly want intelligence. It's sort of Guantanamo style. We're using torture to get intelligence because we think the terrorist risk is so clear, right? Israel can very easily stop something like October the 7th happening, right? One of the reasons it was able to happen is because they moved so many of their soldiers over to the West Bank to try and help settlers steal land, right? If they'd been on the border, if they'd sort of followed their intelligence properly, they could have stopped it. Yeah, obviously, nothing justifies breaking people's bones and teeth for intelligence, but they don't even need to do that anyway, which is where this idea of revenge comes in, right? These are people who are taking out their anger on Palestinians. And I mean, I suppose that's the story of the whole war, really, isn't it? Sort of the Israelis acting with anger to collectively punish 2 million people. And it's in these sort of secret detention centers where this is sort of done in the most brutal and sadistic fashion. Those 2 whistleblowers were workers there. I mean, this is a sort of army-based turned detention center, so potentially there were people who'd been drafted. CNN also spoke to a medic.
The problem is Gazans who are brought in are labeled as terrorists, and it is very popular opinion over here that terrorists deserve to die, so they do not deserve the same medical care as everyone else.
Satellite imagery obtained by CNN shows how the Sidi Taman facility was expanded after the October 7th attacks. with detention facilities and makeshift medical bays being added after public hospitals in Israel refused to treat injured Gazan suspects. Eyewitness accounts describe a field hospital with 15 to 20 patients, virtually naked and blindfolded, with hands and feet shackled to their beds and wearing diapers. One eyewitness told CNN painful procedures were carried out by underqualified medics. Treatment, the medical worker told us, amounts to punishment.
In my view, it's the idea of total vulnerability. If you imagine being unable to move, being unable to see what's going on, that's something that borders, if not crosses, into psychological torture.
I mean, I would say that clearly crosses into psychological torture. I mean, imagine you're lying there, you're already injured, you've got your hands and your feet, padlocked, handcuffed to your bed. You've got your eyes covered. People are operating on you. You've got absolutely no idea what's going on. You're just feeling intense pain and presumably like confusion, right? That would drive you completely mad, I think, not having any idea where you are, not being able to move, not being able to see. You see this time and time again, don't you, Ash? Where sort of the moment you label someone a terrorist, you can treat them, not morally, of course, but sort of psychologically, however you want, however sadistic it might seem, however inhumane, they are now a terrorist and they're sort of subhuman, so you can do what you want.
I mean, this was one of the tactics of the war on terror. Those who were labeled terrorists were termed unlawful combatants. And because they were labeled unlawful combatants, it was argued by America at that time that the rules of law didn't apply to them. Now, this is exactly the language that has been used by Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant to say that those who they deem to be Hamas terrorists, which doesn't necessarily mean that they are not to be considered as enemy combatants of an enemy army. They're to be considered unlawful combatants, so the rules of war don't apply. I think there are a lot of parallels that you can draw between this particular torture camp and, again, the infrastructure of torture and detention that existed during the war on terror. Of course, a lot of that infrastructure does still exist on a smaller scale. What America did was that it operated its torture camps, its detention facilities, where those who were accused of being unlawful combatants and held without charge. You, of course, had CIA-run black sites. Many of the prisoners there were acquired through rendition. They were essentially either passed from American custody into the custody of states whose operatives carried out the torture to create this kind of plausible deniability. All these men were victims of rendition into American hands. Guantanamo is, of course, infamous, but the worst torture was carried out by the CIA. What makes Israel different is that Israel is unable to use an international infrastructure of detention and torture. It doesn't have that layer of plausible deniability by saying this is happening outside of our jurisdiction, or really technically it's being carried out by another sovereign state. This is happening on Israeli occupied land where Israel claims sovereignty, claims Israeli law, is supposedly subject to international law, and quite clearly this horrendous torture, and it is torture, to be handcuffed, blindfolded, and forced into a nappy without the basic dignity of being able to use the bathroom. That is torture, right? I don't really care what the legal thresholds are. If that happened to you, you would consider that torture. All of this is being carried out in a way which shows that Israel doesn't fear the repercussions of international law. It's unable to have the same kind of international infrastructure that America used, but also they don't need that same infrastructure that America used because of the radicalization of the Israeli civilian population, which is broadly in favor of even more use of force against the Palestinians. And it also doesn't fear being held accountable through the means of international law because of the diplomatic protection that is afforded by the US and also the UK and Germany as well. So what is going on in that camp is disgusting. There is shared culpability, I think, with Western nations, even if it's not our operatives who directly have blood on their hands. We helped create the context in which something like this is possible.